Why
It
not?
started
You know
out
what I mean?
as a truly artsy liberal thing that I think's good.
Is their plan for a world government, and it is based on a Germanic death cult.
Once again, not with these planes.
When you've got the most powerful people in the world who won't let anyone else know exactly what's going on, gives a little cause for concern.
So, since the last Joe Rogan video I did was relatively popular, I'm looking at a newer Joe Rogan episode, this time not with Brian Mirarescu, it's not even with a historian, it's with Alex Jones, of all people. Of course, Alex Jones is the renowned conspiracy theorist, mostly written off as a quack, which I think is pretty warranted.
And that's why they wrote the big article, the co-owner of Sun Microsystems. In 2000, Bill Joy wrote Why the Future Doesn't Need Us. And he explains he went to a top billionaire tech conference and they made the decision to not let humans sit around and play video games in the future, that they were just going to slowly phase us out and kill everybody.
Stop. They're not trying to kill
Okay, pull up Why the Future Doesn't...
That being said, there are some things that he does get right, and there is this one cool thing that they touch on during the talk, which is the subject of Bohemian Grove. Below in the description, I'm going to link that YouTube video for the Joe Rogan Alex Jones conversation, as well as a little documentary that Alex Jones made about 20 years ago about Bohemian Grove. Of course, he gets into a lot of conspiracy theory stuff as well, but there is some legitimate history in there. And there's also going to be a thing from the History Channel looking at Brian Meltzer's episode that he does looking at Bohemian Grove as well. So, just a little rundown, what exactly is Bohemian Grove? At first, it seems pretty boring. It's essentially this good old boys club. It's hosted by the Bohemian Club. The Bohemian Grove is the venue. It takes place near Monte Rio, California. It's a 2,700-acre private area in the Redwood Forests, and pretty much it's a place where a whole bunch of really important people come and congregate. They enjoy theater and music, and they celebrate those things. It's thought that some more important things go down there. Some big members of the club include people such as Herbert Hoover, Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, J. Robert Oppenheimer, Dwight D. Eisenhower, FDR, Bill Clinton, the Bushes, the Rockefellers, Walter Cronkite, various founding members of the Federal Reserve, Howard Taft, who was, of course, an early American president. It's also rumored that things like the Manhattan Project actually were first thought of in the Bohemian Grove, so it is a very important place for a lot of really important people. As for the history of this place, it's thought to have started in the year 1872. There was this guy, Henry Edwards. He was sort of a well-known actor or something along those lines. On the West Coast, he was leaving the area, so he and a bunch of his, art friends pretty much went out and just had a weird, happy time in the middle of the redwoods. They slept there, they sang songs, they did all this fun stuff, and then he left, but they ended up doing it the next year as well, and it sort of became a tradition, and it kind of grew over time, and so that started in 1872, and it shifted to the current location, the Bohemian Grove, in 1893, when it was finally bought out. So the sort of official symbol of the Bohemian Club is John of Nepomuk. He is a patron saint. Essentially, his claim to fame is he was a priest, and there was some monarch, I believe a prince or a princess, who was confessing to him, and the monarch wanted him to divulge the confessions, and he wouldn't do it, and he was put to death. That's kind of why they're called the Bohemian Club, because John of Nepomuk was from Bohemia. The official saying is "weaving spiders not come here," essentially saying leave your business outside. That doesn't really seem to be what's actually happening. It seems like there's actually all these elites making all these decisions in this very private area, but we don't know for sure. There's some weird things that go on there. They have a segregated staff. It's pretty much all men only. There's some women, but they only work like the opening gates. They can't really go into the thing. Things get a little weirder than that when you take into account that John of Nepomuk, again, who's their sort of icon, he's best known for his keeping of secrets. His actual symbol is him with his finger over his mouth in the classic shh gesture. So that is a little interesting. You would think if they're an artsy club, they might look up to something more than just keeping secrets, but who knows? The place also has very high security, which comes into play if you look at the Brian Meltzer thing or if you look at anything else about Bohemian Club. However, in 2000, it was infiltrated by Alex Jones, and this is where things get weird.
They've always been arrested and had their film confiscated. And in July of 2000, I snuck in and shot some hidden video, the only video to ever get out of the Grove.
Midsummer sets us free. You don't burn me once again. Not with these flames.
So as he said there, he managed to infiltrate, and he's talking about he was able to film the cremation of care ceremony, which is quite weird. Essentially what it looks like is it's all these people in weird clan-like robes, and they gather around this giant stone owl in the middle of the woods, and Walter Cronkite's voice comes from it, and there's all these pyrotechnics, and a effigy of a child is brought up and then is lit on fire. That child is supposed to be Care, and essentially that's a way for them to bond and sort of symbolize that all their cares are secondary to the group. Brian Meltzer does have a good point about this, though, looking about it from the outside.
It is very dangerous to try to interpret something from the outside. It's as if someone unfamiliar with Christianity stepped into a Catholic church and heard a priest in the middle of Holy Communion say the words, "This is the body of Christ, this is the blood of Christ." Without knowing the context, the ritual can seem strange or unusual, even a little frightening.
But the biggest thing isn't so much the weirdness of the owl and that whole ceremony, although that is kind of weird. It's more when you get into the conspiratorial elements that Alex Jones brings up. I haven't looked into them enough to know if they're genuinely credible or if he's just kind of talking out of his ass. And some of this is his personal experience. When he was in there, for example, he talks about being hit on by a lot of the men there, and he claims that he saw various pictures of very powerful men in very compromised positions.
Hanging in, and people say, why do you get a video? I have a camera hidden right here. It's Henry Kissinger bent over in a woman's dress, sticking his fingers in his ass.
He also talks about the propensity for some of these people to have homosexual sex with each other despite not actually being homosexual. He kind of explains that whole thing as well on the Joe Rogan Podcast.
It's all about being improper. And then they all go get caught to compromise each other to be in the club. It's a hazing thing.
So that they can trust each other because they're all doing shady shit.
He also goes into some detail about what the owl represents. Some people believe it's just sort of a general symbol for knowledge. He actually believes that it is a symbol of Moloch, which is a entity in the Bible. It shows up. It's not an owl in the Bible, and essentially that is a pagan thing where in the Bible it says something along the lines of sacrifice not your children to Moloch, essentially saying, you know, there was this pagan group of people that were sacrificing their children to it, and it's considered anti-Christian. Some might say satanic. Here, Alex Jones in the podcast also talks about some more conspiratorial stuff. Surprise. He brings in a Skull and Bones connection. For those of you who don't know, Skull and Bones is a secret society from Yale. It's thought to, depending on who you ask, either just kind of a bunch of college nerdy kids just doing dumb shit, all the way up to genuinely satanic rituals such as simulated burials, simulated human sacrifices, even grave robbing. The way he brings this in is President Taft was a member of the Bohemian Society, and he was also a member of Skull and Bones. His theory is that Skull and Bones essentially took over and co-opted the Bohemian Club. And here, of course, if you know Alex Jones at all, his big conspiracy is that there is a group of people that are trying to take over the whole world and create some new world order.
But I just want to say that overall, it started out as a truly artsy, liberal thing that I think's good. I think guys deserve to go off the woods like we've done since humans were humans, and party and do whatever.
Right.
And so it's but the thing is, then the weird skull. Here's what happened: about 1900, Skull and Bones, that was at Yale in New Haven, Connecticut, that was a German death cult. It took over Bohemian Grove, and that's when they set up that as the central deal.
It was William Howard Taft, the president who came here to the Bohemian Grove, who of course was the high-level Skull and Bones member, who first began to talk about a world government, a League of Nations, which was then picked up a few years later by Woodrow Wilson. And so this whole system is their plan for a world government, and it is based on a Germanic death cult.
Overall, what do I think of this whole Bohemian Grove thing? I do think it is pretty open to interpretation. If you look at sort of the Brian Meltzer slant on this, they kind of take it as it's just a bunch of powerful people doing really weird things in the woods, which we may think is odd, but there's nothing inherently wrong with it.
It's nothing deeper. There's nothing weird going. Well, I wouldn't say there's nothing weird going on here, but there's nothing nefarious going on here. It's just, like you said, buddy, a bunch of businessmen in a men's club.
It's a serious fraternity that happens to be some players.
All the way to the Alex Jones theories, which is that what they're doing is pretty much plotting to take over the world in some new world order sort of thing. Either way, both of them do think it's a little concerning that you have all these very powerful people doing all this stuff in private, often misbehaving, often...
You know, I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist, but I think when you've got the most powerful people in the world, the most powerful, influential men who won't let anyone else know exactly what's going on, gives a little cause for concern.
As for the validity of Jones's claims, I'm really not sure. I think a lot, depending on your opinion of Alex Jones, he's either some sort of alt-right person, or he's just crazy, or he's actually just a fraud and he's making the whole thing up, or he actually believes it and he's just a big conspiracy theory nut. I think there might be some validity to what he says. There are a few times that he has gotten big stuff right. Some possible evidence for this is that after he came forward with the tapes, he sent them to the media, and they all got sent back to him erased, which is weird. Usually if you send something to the media and they don't want it, they just send it back. That was actually sent back erased. He was also death threatened a lot. He had people calling his house, saying they were watching his house, threatening to kill him, which is strange. You wouldn't think that people would be doing that unless maybe he struck a chord. He also claims that he's been in 5 times. I don't know if that's true either. But yeah, that's it for this video, guys. Hope you enjoyed. If you want to learn more about that stuff, whether it just be the more mainline historical stuff, or if you want to go down that conspiracy rabbit hole, feel free to watch Brian Meltzer's thing in the description with the History Channel, Alex Jones's documentary from the 2000s, or the most recent Alex Jones podcast with Tim Dillon and Joe Rogan. They talk about all that stuff there as well. And yeah, have a great day, guys, and I'll see you later.